Hello, I'm sorry I can't be online with you, but I'm really not at my best at 2 in the morning. Nevertheless, it's great to have this opportunity to talk to you about being the arrow and how integration and implementation sciences is one option for doing that. So you might recall this image that Christine put up last month when she talked about this series, and I'm going to be concentrating on this particular piece of this image. So what would it look like for emerging integration professions to be disciplinary experts? I'm going to give you a very brief history and the commonalities from when integration and implementation was first developed to the current third version that I'm working on now. I'm then going to go through the framework and the associated expertise in a little bit more detail. And I'm going to finish by talking about how I envisage being the arrow would work. The starting point for me was really in the 1990s when I had the opportunity to lead a great project on whether or not we should prescribe heroin to dependent heroin users. And I had the opportunity to do that in a way that I thought it should be done, which was to bring in multiple disciplines to work with all the stakeholders, police, drug users, service providers, and also to work closely with the political process. So working with government about how this could be implemented. In case you're wondering, it was implemented for a total of 18 days before the Prime Minister said, no, we're not doing this. And then I spent some time thinking about what could we have done better. What we did was all very intuitive. There were no real tools that we had at our disposal to bring to play. And I was curious about what we could have done if we'd known about it. So in 2000, I had the opportunity to attend a whole range of conferences on systems thinking, interdisciplinarity, action research. Transdisciplinarity wasn't much of a thing at that time. It certainly didn't have any conferences. Did a lot of reading, talked to a lot of people, and discovered that, yes, indeed, there was a lot out there that we could have used if we'd known about it, lots of theory and methods. But it was also hard to find and highly fragmented. And the other thing that was really striking was that the communities were very small. So the Systems Thinking Conference, which was an international conference, only had a few hundred people at it. And that was typical for all the conferences. Not only were they small, but they didn't talk to each other. And I was comparing it also with discipline-based conferences that I'd been to before, which had thousands or tens of thousands of people at them, and now even more so. And everything that happened subsequent to that really pivotal year was reinforced those lessons for me. So in 2002, I set up the first website, and in 2005 published the first paper, the first iteration of i2S, so i2S 1.0, and this was a paper in the journal Ecology and Society. In 2013, I published a book called Disciplining Interdisciplinarity. And 10 years later now, I'm working on a third version of thinking about i2S. You obviously can't read this image, but this is i2S in a single image, and I'm going to talk about bits of this now. Not now, shortly. First, I'm going to talk about what stayed the same. So what stayed the same across these three approaches is a focus on connecting these disparate communities. The communities are represented here in this word cloud, and the point is that they've all got things to offer to people tackling complex societal and environmental problems, which is the focus of the work that I'm doing, but none of them cover all of it, and there's a lot that they could learn from each other. It's important not only for those scholarly reasons, but also for political reasons. Because these communities are so small, they really don't have any political influence. And so I've always been thinking about how do we improve the scholarly work, but also how do we improve the political influence. The other thing that stayed the same is this idea of building a cross-cutting repository of knowledge. And here I mean concepts, methods, and other tools that are useful for tackling complex societal and environmental problems. The first website was, as I said, developed in 2002. This is the Integration and Implementation Sciences website, which had a resources repository, which we've just dismantled, because it's really been taken over by Integration and Implementation Insights, which is a blog and repository which started in 2015. So they worked together for a while, and now one's taken over. I hope you all know about this blog. I hope that you will contribute to it if you haven't already. I know that Bethany and the two Christines have made terrific contributions, and if I could tell who was in the audience, I could give a shout out probably to some others of you. But really, this is a repository that really tries to both build community and capitalise on the community's knowledge and resources. So please contribute. So in a nutshell, the new framework looks like this. It's got 3 areas, which are in the top bar, and then 11 major topics that it deals with. So let me deal with these in more detail one by one. So the first area is that we need to understand problems and potential actions more comprehensively. And to do that, we need to do 5 things. So the first is we need to look at the problems and the actions as systems. That means we need to attend to the dynamic webs of relationships. We need to understand that we can never deal with a whole system. We always have to set boundaries. We need to be able to look down at the small. We need to look back up at the whole. And we need to be able to take different perspectives, which is a key piece that appears at several points. We need to understand the importance of context, and that's important in 3 ways. So not only big picture context, so what's the history, the geography, the cultural aspects, the economics, what's the political context in which we're operating, and what does that make possible, and what does it shut down? We also need to understand the context of the organisations that we work in and the organisations that we work with. So their structure and culture, and what do they make possible and what do they shut down? And then we need to understand our individual context, our own individual context or positionality. So what is our experience and our position in society? What does that make possible and what does it shut down? We also need to be able to deal with what we don't know. It's really risky to put it to one side because that's where all the adverse unintended consequences and nasty surprises come from. So we need better ways of dealing with the unknown. We need to be able to manage or bring to the table, we need to be able to bring to the table diversity. And that's not just differences in gender identity and age and ability, but it's also different worldviews, different values, different interests, different understandings of what makes for good science. And it's not enough to just bring that all to the table, but we also need to be able to develop an integrated view. So how do we pull together these different perspectives, these different ways of looking at it to get this richer picture and this richer set of possibilities for action? We also need to understand that some things cannot be brought together, and what do we do with those? The second bit of the framework is to be able to support policy and practice improvement, which happens by government, by business, by civil society. As researchers, we're generally not in a position to make improvements on complex problems, but we can work closely with those who do make those improvements. And that's got 3 dimensions as well, and 3 areas where we need to develop expertise. The first is in decision making. So before we can do anything, decisions have to be made. And so we need to be able to help governments and business and civil society make better decisions. We need to help them understand how to make rational, well thought through decisions on the complex aspects of problems, and how to take into account the biases and heuristics that most of the short-term decision making that we make in almost all of our lives, how to take that into account so that it doesn't wreck the important decisions that have to be made. The second piece is research implementation, which is how do we get better evidence and get good evidence better into policy and practice? How do we have the policy and practice to be informed and hopefully even based on evidence? And finally, how do we bring about a good understanding of change, not only in our own communities, so that as researchers we're not simple-minded about change happens. It's not just a matter of telling policymakers what they need to do, and it's not just a matter of policymakers telling the community what they need to do. Change is this wonderful dance that happens in society. Things are changing all the time, and you've got to get in there, and you've got to be very canny in order to be able to make improvements happen, especially when there are countervailing forces. And so we have an obligation as researchers to understand what those processes are and to help people be able to affect change more effectively. The third is that to do all that, we need to be able to interact effectively. So we need to be able to work effectively in teams. So we need to be able to manage collaborations. We need to be able to build trust, build a shared vision, and all those things that are important for working together. We need to be able to manage our disagreements. We need to be able to engage with stakeholders effectively. Sometimes we'll be co-producing with stakeholders and they'll be in the team, but a lot of the time that's not possible. So how do we work with, what are other options for working with stakeholders, and how do we do the best that we can in the circumstances that we have? And how do we repay stakeholders for the effort of being involved in the research? So what are the obligations we have to them? And finally, in both of these and in everything else that we do, good communication is the key. So how do we learn to explain clearly, to listen actively, and to really be able to communicate well? So let me finish by talking about how I envisage being the arrow works. The analogy I like to use is the discipline of statistics. Sometimes people get confused and think I'm talking about i2S as statistics. No, I'm not, but they're two disciplines that have a lot in common, and I think in making i2S work we can learn quite a lot from statistics. So the first is that each of them has a specific skill set that it brings to teams, and each of them evolves through practical collaboration. So they don't evolve in la-la land, if you like. They evolve by getting their hands dirty with specific problems. The thing that we can really learn from statistics is the dedicated journals. So if a statistician working on a health problem develops a new statistical method, they can publish it in a statistics journal where it can be picked up by other statisticians working on environment or education or some other area. And it's then really easy to disseminate statistical knowledge. We don't have that, and we really need to have it. So if someone working on a sustainability issue develops a new way of working in a team or a new integration method, they tend to publish it in the sustainability journal, where it's then really hard for anybody else working in any other problem, a complex health problem, for example, to find. And we need dedicated journals that will focus on i2S. The other thing that statistics has done really well is that it's made sure that the teams who need statistical help know how to use it well. And we need to do the same for i2S. So that once upon a time, you used to bring a statistician in at the end of the project and say, here's some data, fix it for us, figure out what we found. And statisticians got pretty fed up with that and said, look, you've really got to bring us in at the beginning. You've got to let us help you design the research. And we need to do the same. A lot of the work that's done on complex societal and environmental problems is done fairly intuitively. People don't think that they need expertise until they run into problems. And so we've got to say, look, guys, you need us on the team from the beginning. We can help you design the study more effectively. We can help you think about who needs to be at the table. We can help you manage the interactions with those people, etc., etc. So as you will have seen from the expertise that I've laid out, or from the elements of the framework, it's big. And you don't need to have all that expertise yourself. But what you do need to know is you need to know the importance of the framework And you do need to know good people that you can call on. So if you're really good at change but not good at the unknown, you need to know people who think a lot about the unknown, who could be brought in into the project to help it with those particular aspects. Of course, there aren't enough trained people available at the moment. That's another problem, but this is what I'm arguing that we need training for, right? So what I've tried to do is to give you a taste of what it means to be the arrow. If the arrow was an established academic field, it obviously can't happen unless others are interested and get involved. One person can't develop a discipline. I'm really looking forward to the recording and hearing what Christine and Bethany have to say, along with hearing the discussion and hopefully being able to see the chat. And I'm really happy to be contacted and have follow-up conversations with anyone that's interested. On this slide, you can find information, and the slides will be available, information about the websites, other social media that we use, and at the bottom, most importantly, my email address. So as I said, would really love to hear from you, and I hope you have a great session.